Marcus Turner thought moving to the city would give his daughter a future. He stood quietly outside a Boston courtroom, wearing a worn black jacket, trying to raise a child in a world that judged him before hearing his name. Beside him was Ava, small, silent, holding her school bag like a shield, hiding bruises she never had the courage to explain. Marcus believed silence was strength. He believed hard work would protect her. But when wealthy families mistook dignity for weakness, when cruelty hid behind status, and when a police officer raised his fist inside a courtroom meant for justice, everything changed. That was the moment Marcus stopped staying quiet. The room didn't see anger. They saw a father who refused to let his child be broken. And the greatest mistake they made was believing a black man defending his daughter would ever step back. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. Boston greeted them with cold rain and restless wind. The city did not pause to welcome anyone. Cars rushed past puddles along narrow streets. Old brick buildings stood shoulder to shoulder like they had survived too much to care about newcomers. The sky was a dull gray. Heavy, but not dramatic, just enough to make everything feel slightly harder than it needed to be. David Turner noticed all of it, but he did not comment. David was a black man in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered with the kind of physical presence that made people look twice and then look away. His skin was a deep brown, weathered by years of night shifts and outdoor labor. His hair was kept close to his scalp, more out of habit than style. His face was quiet, strong jaw, tired eyes, the expression of a man who had learned long ago that speaking less often meant surviving more. He wore a dark jacket that had once been new. Faded jeans and sturdy work boots scuffed at the toes. Everything about him suggested practicality, restraint, and a life built around endurance rather than comfort. Beside him walked his daughter. Lena Turner was 12 years old, small for her age with narrow shoulders and careful movements, as if she were constantly aware of the space she occupied. Her skin was lighter than her father's, warm brown with a softness that still belonged to childhood. Her hair, thick, tightly coiled and naturally voluminous, was braided neatly and pulled back, a style her father had learned to do clumsily at first and then with quiet pride. Lena carried a backpack that looked too heavy for her frame, though much of its weight came from books she insisted on bringing everywhere. She had large, observant eyes that absorbed details quickly, but rarely revealed what she was thinking. She smiled politely when spoken to, softly, the way children learn to smile when they don't want to be noticed too much. Boston was not home. But David had promised it would be the place where her future began. They stood outside a modest apartment building, rain tapping against the sidewalk, as David spoke to a landlord through a half-open door. The man inside, middle-aged, white, neatly dressed, smiled tightly while flipping through papers. "I'm afraid your application doesn't quite meet our requirements," the landlord said, not unkindly. "Income verification? Credit history? It's all very competitive around here." David nodded once. He did not argue. He did not explain that he had worked every night for the past 6 years without missing a shift. He did not mention his savings. He did not mention his daughter's school. He simply thanked the man and turned away. Lena followed without asking questions. They eventually found a smaller apartment farther away, older, quieter, less convenient. It was not close to Lena's school, but it was clean, and the landlord didn't ask many questions. David took it immediately. That night, while Lena unpacked her books and notebooks with careful precision, David sat at the small kitchen table reviewing delivery schedules. He worked as a night delivery driver, transporting medical supplies and warehouse goods across the city. The hours were brutal, but the pay was steady. Every dollar had a purpose. Because Lena Turner had been accepted into Brighton Crest Academy. Brighton Crest was not just a school. It was a statement. A private institution perched on a manicured hill, known for its academic excellence and its powerful alumni. Lawyers, politicians, corporate executives, families whose last names carried weight in courtrooms and boardrooms alike. David had stood in line with Lena on the day of the entrance exam, surrounded by parents in tailored coats and quiet confidence. He remembered the looks, curious, measuring, dismissive. He remembered gripping Lena's shoulder gently and telling her she didn't need to impress anyone but herself. Lena passed the exam. Barely, according to the letter, but she passed. On the first day of school, Brighton Crest looked like something from a brochure. Tall white columns, trimmed hedges, wide stone steps worn smooth by generations of privilege. Lena wore her uniform neatly pressed. David had ironed it himself before leaving for work that morning. He watched her walk toward the entrance, her steps hesitant but determined. For a moment she turned back, searching for him in the crowd. When she found his eyes, she smiled. Small, quick, brave. David nodded. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive perfume. Students clustered together in groups formed long before Lena ever arrived. Their laughter came easily, their confidence inherited. Lena took a seat near the back of the assembly hall. She noticed things immediately. The way conversations paused when she walked past. The way a girl glanced at her shoes and then whispered to a friend. The way parents stood together during orientation, discussing summer homes and internships, while one mother leaned toward another and murmured quietly, "Is she one of the scholarship kids?" "I think so. You can tell." Lena pretended not to hear. She stared at the stage instead, her hands folded in her lap. She told herself it didn't matter. That evening, David waited up for her despite having work in a few hours. Lena came home tired but composed. "How was school?" he asked. "It was fine," she said quickly. David studied her face, searching for cracks, but found none. He nodded and let it go. Days passed. Lena learned the routines, the schedules, the unspoken rules. She learned which hallways felt colder, which tables filled fastest, which voices carried authority even among children. She did not make friends. She did not complain. Each afternoon, she returned home quieter than before. David noticed. He always noticed. But he also knew pressure could break delicate things, so he waited. He cooked dinner when he could. He left notes on the counter when he worked late. Small acts, steady acts. One afternoon, as Lena waited near the school gates for the bus, she overheard two parents speaking behind her. "At least the school looks diverse on paper," one said lightly. "Yes," the other replied. "They do like to keep appearances." Lena kept her eyes forward. She did not tell her father. That night, rain returned to the city heavier than before. David drove through slick streets under streetlights that blurred into long, yellow streaks. He thought about Lena, about the distance between the apartment and the school, about how much harder everything seemed to be taking longer than it should. Boston did not wait. It never had. But David Turner had learned something else over the years. Sometimes survival meant standing still long enough to see what was coming. Somewhere between the rain, the silence, and his daughter's forced smile, something was coming. Brighton Crest Academy looked immaculate in the morning light. Sun filtered through tall windows, catching on polished floors and framed photographs of past graduating classes, rows of confident faces, generations of certainty. Lena noticed how easily the other students moved through the halls, as if the building itself recognized them. She tried to mirror that ease. On her second week, Lena began greeting classmates softly. A quick hi in the hallway, a polite smile when she sat down. She learned names quickly, practiced them in her head, hoping familiarity would open a door. Most of the time, the door never moved. Some students didn't respond at all. Others smiled back with eyes that remained distant, assessing. At lunch, she sat at the edge of a long table, her tray balanced carefully. Conversations flowed around her. Vacations in Aspen, private tutors, summer programs overseas. When Lena tried to join in, Her voice fell into a gap no one noticed. Across the cafeteria, a group of students laughed loudly. At the center of them sat Ryan Whitmore. Ryan was tall for his age, already carrying the posture of someone accustomed to being listened to. His blonde hair was always neatly styled, his uniform crisp in a way that suggested it had never been wrinkled by worry. His eyes were sharp, observant, and carried a confidence that bordered on entitlement. He was the son of a federal judge, a fact he never announced but never needed to. People seemed to know. Ryan noticed Lena before she noticed him. It started small. One afternoon, Lena opened her locker to find her backpack missing. She searched quietly, checking nearby lockers, her chest tightening. When she finally found it tucked behind a trash bin, the zipper was open and her notebooks were damp, pages warped. Another day, she returned to her seat to find water spilled across her desk, soaking her books. A boy nearby shrugged, pretending it was an accident. Ryan watched from across the room, smiling faintly. The rumors followed soon after. She only got in because the school needs diversity. My mom said she's on a special program. Yeah, like charity. The words were never said directly to Lena's face. They floated just close enough to be heard, designed to wound without leaving fingerprints. Lena said nothing. At home, she kept her routine intact. Shoes by the door. Homework spread neatly across the table. When David asked about school, she answered the same way every time. I'm okay. David noticed the way her shoulders slumped more than before. He noticed how she went straight to her room after dinner, how her laughter, once easy, had become rare and careful. He noticed, but exhaustion pressed down on him like a weight. Bills, rent, tuition payments. He told himself children needed time to adjust. So he worked more. David began taking additional night routes, trading sleep for overtime. The warehouse manager didn't ask questions. He never did. David left the apartment before Lena finished dinner and returned while the city slept. Sometimes he found notes she left on the counter, small drawings, reminders to eat, hearts drawn in pen. He kept every one. Back at Brighton Crest, Lena discovered the music room. It was tucked away at the end of a quiet hallway, far from the noise of lockers and laughter. Inside, the air felt different, calmer. Instruments rested against the walls, and a grand piano sat in the center, its surface reflecting the overhead lights. Music had always been Lena's refuge. She began staying after school, pretending she needed extra practice time. No one questioned it. In the music room, she could breathe. She played softly at first, fingers careful, then with growing confidence. The notes filled the space she otherwise felt denied. That was when Ms. Eleanor Price first noticed her. Ms. Price was in her early 50s, slender, with graying auburn hair pulled back into a loose bun. She wore simple dresses and flat shoes, moving through the school with quiet attentiveness rather than authority. Years earlier, she had been a concert pianist until a sudden illness left her with lingering weakness in her hands. Teaching music had become both her compromise and her calling. She noticed Lena because she noticed what others missed. The way Lena stayed long after the halls emptied. The way she played as if the piano were listening. The way her shoulders tensed whenever footsteps passed outside the door. You don't have to rush, Miss Price said gently one evening, leaning against the doorway. Lena startled, then relaxed. I know. Miss Price smiled. You play like someone who needs the room to stay quiet. Lena looked down at the keys. She didn't answer. Meanwhile, Ryan's group escalated. One morning, Lena arrived to find her locker scrawled with faint marker lines. Nothing explicit, just symbols and words that suggested mockery. She erased them before anyone else could see. In class, her answers were ignored or corrected harshly, even when she was right. Once, in the hallway, Ryan brushed past her deliberately, knocking her books to the floor. As she knelt to gather them, he leaned down just enough for her to hear. You should be grateful you're here, he said softly. Not everyone gets handouts. Lena's hands shook as she picked up her books. She did not look up. At home that night, David missed dinner again. Lena reheated leftovers and ate alone. She practiced piano on the small keyboard her father had bought secondhand years ago, keeping the volume low. She told herself this was temporary, that if she endured quietly, it would pass. Miss Price began leaving the music room door open when Lena practiced, a small gesture of protection. She didn't ask questions yet. She simply watched, waited, and made notes. David, unaware of most of it, drove through the city under flickering streetlights, trading hours of rest for the illusion of security. He told himself this sacrifice was necessary. He told himself Lena was strong. Both of them believed silence was safer. Neither of them knew how much it cost. The afternoon Lena came home late. The sky over Boston was low and colorless, the kind of gray that pressed down on the streets and made every sound feel heavier. David was at the kitchen sink when he heard the door unlock. He turned, already ready to ask why she was late, and then he saw her. Lena stood just inside the doorway, her backpack hanging crookedly from one shoulder. Her uniform was smeared with dirt and something darker that had dried stiff along the hem. One sleeve was torn. Her knees were scraped raw, skin reddened and swollen, and a bruise bloomed along her forearm, already turning deep purple. Her braids had come loose, strands of hair clinging to her damp face. She tried to speak. No words came out. Then she collapsed into tears. David froze. He did not rush forward at first. He simply stared, as if his mind needed time to accept what his eyes were seeing. When he finally moved, it was slow and deliberate. He set his hands on her shoulders, careful not to hurt her, and guided her to the chair. "Who did this?" he asked quietly. Lena shook her head, sobbing harder. Her hands twisted together, knuckles white. She tried to stop crying and failed. David fetched a towel and a glass of water. He cleaned the dirt from her knees, his jaw tight, his breathing controlled. He did not raise his voice. He did not curse. The silence around them felt sharper than any shout. "I didn't want to tell you," Lena whispered finally. "I didn't want you to worry." David closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, something in his expression had shifted. Not anger, not yet, but a terrible clarity. That night, Lena slept restlessly. David sat at the small table until dawn, staring at the wall. He did not go to work. For the first time in years, he called in. The next morning, he put on his best jacket, the one he reserved for important things, and walked Lena to the bus stop himself. He watched until the bus disappeared down the street. Then he turned toward Brighton Crest Academy. The school looked the same as always, calm, immaculate, protected by its own sense of importance. David stepped inside and asked for names. He already had some. Lena had given them through tears the night before. He went to the first house that afternoon. The Whitmore residence sat behind a tall iron gate. The home itself was wide and white, framed by trimmed hedges and security cameras that followed his movement. When the door opened, a woman stood there, tall, elegant, her blonde hair perfectly styled. This was Margaret Whitmore, Ryan's mother. She carried herself with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to control. Her eyes flicked briefly to David's shoes, then back to his face. "Yes?" she asked. David explained why he was there. He spoke calmly. He described what had happened to his daughter. He asked for an apology, accountability, assurance that it would stop. Margaret smiled thinly. "Children can be dramatic," she said. "I'm sure Ryan didn't mean any harm." David did not argue. He repeated his request. She sighed, already bored. "You should be careful with accusations," she added. "My husband doesn't take kindly to them." The door closed gently in his face. At the next house, a man answered. A corporate lawyer, heavy-set, red-faced, irritation written plainly across his features. He laughed outright when David spoke. "You people always play the victim," the man said. Maybe your daughter just doesn't fit in. Another parent told David he was embarrassing himself. One suggested he move his child to a more appropriate school. None denied the behavior outright. None apologized. One of them leaned in close enough for David to smell expensive cologne and said quietly, "Know your place." David thanked them all before leaving. Back at school, Ms. Eleanor Price sat alone in the music room, staring at her laptop. Her slender hands hovered above the keyboard, fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from decision. She had seen Lena leave the day before, eyes red, posture collapsed. She had heard laughter echo down the hallway afterward. Ms. Price had learned long ago what silence allowed. She began saving everything. Emails sent to administrators that went unanswered, messages between students that had been forwarded anonymously, hallway camera footage she requested under the guise of reviewing after-hours access. She copied files onto a small external drive and locked it in her desk drawer. Meanwhile, Ryan Whitmore leaned back in his chair during lunch, surrounded by his friends. He spoke loudly enough to be heard. "My dad will handle it," he said, grinning. "That guy doesn't know who he's messing with." Ryan's confidence drew laughter. His friends relaxed. Consequences to them were theoretical things that happened to other people. That evening, Lena sat quietly at home, her injuries hidden under long sleeves. David cooked dinner, but neither of them ate much. He asked no more questions. He already had answers. The truth had bled into the open, and there was no way to wipe it away. The summons arrived on a Thursday morning, folded precisely and delivered without ceremony. David Turner read it twice at the kitchen table while the kettle cooled beside him. The language was formal, distant, and absolute. Accusations of defamation, intimidation of minors, disruption of school order. It painted a portrait of a man he barely recognized. Volatile, threatening, reckless. Nowhere did it mention a child with bruises. Nowhere did it mention silence. David folded the paper and placed it carefully into his jacket pocket. At Brighton Crest, rumors spread faster than facts. Parents spoke in tight circles near the entrance, voices lowered but confident. Some nodded when David passed, most did not. Lena felt the shift immediately. Teachers avoided her eyes. A guidance counselor suggested, "Time away to recover." The suggestion sounded like exile dressed as concern. The courthouse downtown stood heavy and gray, its steps worn smooth by decades of authority. On the morning of the hearing, David arrived early, dressed plainly. His shoulders were square, his posture controlled. He carried no folder, no notes, only the truth, which the building did not seem designed to hear. Lena sat beside him, pale, her hands folded in her lap. She wore long sleeves despite the warm air inside. She had insisted on coming. David had not argued. Across the aisle, the Whitmore family assembled with ease. Margaret Whitmore sat straight-backed, elegant as ever, her expression composed and faintly bored. Beside her was her husband's brother, Officer Mark Whitmore, a tall white man in his late 40s with close-cropped hair and a rigid jaw. He wore his uniform with practiced authority, shoulders set wide, eyes scanning the room as if it were his to command. Years on the force had taught him that presence mattered as much as power. Ryan Whitmore lounged a row behind them, whispering to friends, smiling. The judge entered. George Holloway was a heavy-set man in his early 60s, his silver hair thinning at the crown, his face lined with years of decisions that rarely pleased everyone. He moved slowly to the bench, the black robe settling around him like a burden he had learned to carry. Holloway had spent his career believing in order. Rules applied evenly, procedures followed precisely. Yet as he surveyed the room, something unsettled him. He recognized the imbalance immediately, even if the law did not ask him to name it. Proceedings began. The family's attorney spoke smoothly, confidently presenting David as a disruptive outsider who had threatened children and harassed respectable families. Emails were read aloud, carefully selected, stripped of context. Testimonies followed, each one measured, rehearsed. Words like fear, aggression, and instability echoed off the walls. David sat still, hands clasped. When it was his turn to speak, he rose slowly. He explained why he had gone to the parents. He explained the bruises. He explained the silence. His voice did not shake, but his words seemed to land softly, absorbed by the room's indifference. The attorney interrupted him twice. Margaret Whitmore sighed audibly. Something in David cracked. Not loudly, not violently, but finally. He stood straighter, his voice rising as he challenged the lies as he named the cruelty that had been polished into respectability. He did not insult. He did not threaten. He refused to be diminished. "Enough," the attorney snapped. Officer Mark Whitmore moved without hesitation. He crossed the aisle in 3 long strides, his boots striking the floor sharply. He placed a heavy hand on David's shoulder and shoved him back toward his seat. "Sit down," he ordered. David turned, eyes blazing, not with rage but with disbelief. That was when the punch landed. It was fast and unrestrained, driven by authority unchecked. The sound cut through the courtroom like a gunshot. David stumbled, catching himself against the table. Gasps erupted. Someone screamed. Lena collapsed. Her body folded as if the strength had been pulled from her all at once. She hit the floor hard, her backpack spilling open. For a moment, everything stopped. Judge Holloway rose halfway from his seat, his face drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed. The gavel lay untouched beneath his hand. Officer Whitmore stood frozen, fist clenched as if surprised by his own action. The courtroom breathed again, slowly, unevenly. Bailiffs rushed to Lena. A medic was called. David knelt beside her, ignoring the blood at the corner of his mouth, whispering her name over and over. His hands shook now, not with anger, but terror. Judge Holloway watched the scene unfold, his chest tight. The law offered him rules. His conscience offered him none. The session was adjourned. Outside, cameras flashed, questions flew, no answers came. Power had struck back, and it had done so in the open. The video surfaced before the sun finished rising. A shaky clip, 37 seconds long, recorded from the back row of the courtroom by a college intern covering routine hearings. It showed David Turner standing, his voice raised, but his hands empty. It showed Officer Mark Whitmore crossing the aisle with a purpose. And it showed the punch, clean, unmistakable, followed by the sound of a child hitting the floor. By mid-morning, the footage had been shared thousands of times, stripped of commentary and heavy with implication. At the hospital, Lena lay propped against white pillows, her skin pale beneath the fluorescent lights. She was conscious now, alert, though exhaustion weighed on her features. A faint bruise shadowed her temple. Her braids had been redone carefully by a nurse with gentle hands, an older black woman named Ruth Ellis, short and round with kind eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by cruelty. Ruth spoke softly, moved slowly, and never asked questions she already knew the answers to. David sat beside the bed, his jacket folded neatly over the chair, a bandage taped along his cheek. He had barely slept. He watched Lena breathe, counting each rise and fall, as if anchoring himself to the present. "You don't have to do anything," he told her quietly when her eyes fluttered open. "We can stop." Lena turned her head toward him. Her voice was small but steady. "No," she said. "I'm tired of being quiet." Back at Brighton Crest Academy, Ms. Eleanor Price closed the music room door and opened her desk drawer. The small external drive rested there, exactly where she had left it. She held it for a moment, feeling the smooth plastic against her palm. Eleanor had always been composed, reserved to the point of invisibility. Her illness years earlier, the one that ended her performance career, had taught her the cost of vulnerability. But it had also taught her something else. Silence protected institutions, not people. She walked the drive to the administration office herself. The superintendent, Harold Lyons, a tall, thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice trained for donor dinners, frowned as she placed the evidence on his desk. Emails, messages, hallway footage, timelines, names. "This is serious," he said. "Yes," Eleanor replied. "It is." By the time the court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted. Reporters lined the steps outside, microphones clustered like flowers. Inside, whispers followed every movement. Judge George Holloway took the bench with heavier steps than before. His robe felt heavier, too. Officer Mark Whitmore was no longer seated confidently near the front. He stood stiffly at the side, his uniform immaculate, his jaw clenched. The confidence that once filled his posture had drained away, replaced by something brittle. The attorney for the families opened with objections, motions, demands for dismissal. Judge Holloway listened, then raised a hand. "Proceed," he said simply. Ms. Price was called. She walked to the stand with her back straight, her dress simple, her hands steady despite the slight tremor that lingered from her illness. She described what she had seen, what she had saved, why she had waited, and why she had stopped waiting. Her voice did not waver. She named names without malice. Then the students came. One by one, they stood. Some spoke haltingly, some cried. A boy with freckles and shaking hands admitted he had laughed when Lena's books were knocked from her arms. A girl confessed she had shared messages she knew were cruel. None of them looked at Ryan Whitmore. Ryan stared at the table. When Lena's name was called, David stood with her and walked her to the aisle. She paused at the edge, her breath catching. David squeezed her hand once, then let go. Lena faced the room. She described the whispers, the spills, the locker. The words meant to bruise without leaving marks. She described the hallway where she had been cornered, the push that sent her into the lockers, the laughter that followed. Her voice shook, but it did not break. "I thought if I stayed quiet it would stop," she said. "It didn't." The courtroom held its breath. Judge Holloway closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with a resolve that surprised even him. He ordered an immediate suspension of Officer Whitmore pending investigation. Gasps rippled through the room. The parent's attorney objected loudly. Holloway overruled him without hesitation. Outside, headlines wrote themselves. Private school, under fire for systemic bias. Officer, suspended after courtroom assault. Student speaks out against elite bullying. In the neighborhood where David lived, neighbors he barely knew left notes on his door. Some brought food. Others offered rides. A local pastor, Reverend Samuel Cole, a broad-shouldered man with graying hair and a voice shaped by sermons and street corners, stopped by to shake David's hand and tell him the community was watching. "Not quietly," he added. The court adjourned again, this time with purpose. Investigations were announced. Statements issued. David was cleared of all accusations. The word innocent followed his name in print. As evening fell, David and Lena walked home together. The city felt different. Still loud, still indifferent, but touched now by something else. Accountability, perhaps, or the possibility of it. Lena leaned into her father's side as they climbed the stairs. She was tired, but lighter. The truth had found its voice, and it had been heard. Spring arrived quietly in Boston, not with celebration, but with permission. The snow receded into the gutters, the air softened, and the city loosened its grip just enough to let people believe in change. Brighton Crest Academy changed too, first in memos, then in faces. The headmaster resigned before the end of the term. His replacement, Dr. Helen Moore, arrived without ceremony. She was a tall, lean woman in her late 50s with close-cropped gray hair and a direct gaze that did not wander. Her posture was upright, disciplined, the result of years spent navigating institutions that preferred comfort over truth. Dr. Moore had built her reputation rebuilding schools after scandals others wanted buried. She spoke plainly, listened carefully, and took notes with a fountain pen she carried everywhere, a habit formed early in her career when she learned that memory alone was not enough. Within weeks, policies followed. Not slogans, procedures, clear reporting channels, independent oversight, mandatory training that did not shy away from language, consequences that did not negotiate with donors. The school's halls did not become kinder overnight, but they became watched. That mattered. Lena returned on a Monday. She stood at the gate for a moment before entering, the building familiar and strange at once. Her uniform fit the same, but she did not feel the same inside it. She took a breath and walked forward. The stairs were fewer now, the whispers quieter. Some students nodded. A few smiled and meant it. In homeroom, a girl slid her chair closer. Maya Collins was small, freckled, with dark curls pulled into a messy ponytail and a nervous habit of tapping her pencil when she spoke. She had kept to the edges before, a watcher rather than a participant. "If you want," Maya said softly, "we can study together." Lena nodded. "I'd like that." At lunch, the table filled naturally, not with the old confidence but with something earned. Shared glances, tentative jokes, a sense of relief. The bullies' circle had fractured. Some transferred quietly, others learned quickly that silence no longer protected them. Ryan Whitmore did not return. The music room waited at the end of the hall, unchanged. Ms. Eleanor Price stood inside, hands folded, her expression warm but measured. She did not ask questions. She simply unlocked the piano bench and stepped back, offering the space the way she always had, without ownership. Lena practiced for weeks. She chose a piece that moved slowly at first, building toward a clarity that felt like sunrise. She practiced until the notes no longer shook, until the pauses meant something. Miss Price listened from the doorway, correcting gently, encouraging without crowding. Years of restraint had taught her when to speak and when to trust silence. David's life shifted too, though less visibly. The warehouse offered him a supervisory role, nothing grand, but steady hours, better pay, daylight. The manager, a stocky man with a practical kindness, shook his hand and said, "You've earned it." David accepted without ceremony. He brought the offer home folded in his pocket, the way he carried important things. Neighbors stopped him on the stairs now, asked after Lena, told him they were glad she was back. A woman from the third floor, Sarah Klein, short, energetic, with silver-streaked hair and a laugh that filled hallways, knocked one evening with a casserole and a smile that brooked no refusal. "For the piano nights," she said. "They're good for the building." On the day of the end-of-year ceremony, the auditorium filled early. Parents took their seats, programs rustling. Dr. Moore stood at the podium and spoke briefly about accountability, about safety, about learning that extended beyond textbooks. She did not name the past, she did not need to. Lena waited backstage, hands folded, breath steady. Miss Price squeezed her shoulder once and stepped away. The lights dimmed. Lena walked to the piano and sat. She played. The first notes were soft, deliberate. The room quieted. As the piece unfolded, something shifted. Attention, then respect, then recognition. The music rose and resolved, carrying with it the weight of what had been endured and what had been protected. When the final note faded, the pause that followed felt like held breath. Then the applause came. It started in pockets, then filled the room. People stood without instruction. David rose with them, his hands clapping, his eyes burning. He sat in the back row where he had always sat, his jacket folded over his arm, his posture the same as ever. Only his face betrayed him. Tears slipping free unashamed. Not because he had won, because his daughter was safe. Afterward, in the bright chaos of congratulations, Lena found him easily. She slipped her hand into his, smaller than his, steady now. He squeezed once. Outside, the evening was warm. The city moved on as it always would, but something essential had changed for them. They walked home together, unhurried. They had found a place to breathe. At the end of this story, the lesson is simple, but not easy. Silence can feel like safety, especially when the world seems bigger, louder, and more powerful than us. In everyday life, many people choose to stay quiet at work, at school, or even at home, hoping that endurance will bring peace. But this story reminds us that silence protects injustice far more often than it protects the innocent. Courage does not always look loud. Sometimes it looks like a tired parent showing up one more time. Sometimes it looks like a child finding the strength to speak when fear says, "Stay quiet." And sometimes it looks like ordinary people choosing truth over comfort, even when the cost is high. In our daily lives, we may not face a courtroom or a powerful institution, but we all encounter moments where doing the right thing feels risky. When we stand up for our children, our neighbors, or ourselves, we create safer spaces for others to breathe. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need encouragement today. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what part of this story stayed with you the most. If you believe that faith, truth, and love still matter, consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue sharing stories that inspire hope. May God bless you, protect your family, and give you strength when you feel unseen. And if you believe that justice guided by love can still change lives, type Amen in the comments.